Hello and welcome to How To, a series of complete comprehensive guides where I teach you how to do things. Today I'll be showing you how to play the only robot to officially be feared in Apex Legends, Ash.
Do you fear me, Legends?
How this works is I break down each ability for the legend and give you details on how they work and tips on how to use them. Then I'll go over what I feel is the best team comps, give a quick overview of the legend, and list their key points on how to play them. So without further ado, let's get into it. Firstly, Ash is an offense legend, probably one of the most aggressive ones, so if you're using her, you want to play with an aggressive mindset. Which leads us into our passive. Marked for Death. This passive ability shows any recent death boxes on your map for a 3-minute duration on each box. By scanning these death boxes, you can reveal the location of any surviving team that killed them. Once scanned, it will ping the location of the enemy team, so you know their exact location at the time of the ping. It also tells you how many enemies are remaining from that squad. You can scan any box that has a surviving team linked to it within the 3-minute duration of the death box, meaning you can scan multiple boxes back to back to get an eye on the enemy, but keep in mind you can only scan each box once. If you run next to a box, it will have a marker on it indicating that it can be scanned for nearby enemies. And once at the box, it will prompt you to press a button to scan it. Now keep in mind, you can scan a box that has no enemies tied to it, so don't be disappointed if it shows 0 surviving members. If the box is outside of the 3-minute duration, you will not see the marker or be prompted to scan the box. In terms of rank for this passive, it's definitely an S tier. It has a very OP characteristic to it in the case that you can basically see where any team is based on the death marks on your map. Now, how do we use this passive correctly? Well, I mean, it's pretty simple. You just keep checking your map for death boxes. Once you've spotted one that's close to you, you can go ahead and start running over there. It doesn't seem like it's that obvious, but really that's all it is. Just make sure you're constantly checking your map for nearby death boxes. Tracking where enemies have been and possibly still are lets you plan out where to move next. If you don't want to immediately hunt down a team, you can always try and flank them from a certain area or move to a location to ambush them, especially if they're having to run from the storm. Now, these are only speculation as you can't see the team. Only the death boxes of the players that they have recently killed, unless you scan those boxes. Once you've reached the boxes, if you're still within that 3-minute grace period, you can scan and track where that team is. Now, as a side note, your mini-map at the top left will display the death boxes for you so you know what direction to look at on your full map. This passive doesn't have any secret tricks to it. It's actually very simple to use, but something to note is that you're not able to locate a team based off of a death box of a member of that team. A little confusing. What I mean by that is if you kill someone, you won't be able to scan their box for their team members. Aside from that, it's a little OP for a passive. Basically, it gives you a budget wall hack, but really there's nothing like Seer. Next is her tactical ability Arc Snare. This is a small gadget that when thrown will connect to the first enemy it finds inside its area of effect and tether them to a fixed point where they have a minimal area to move in. This deals 10 damage to flesh or unshielded enemies and 20 damage to shielded enemies. This keeps the player tethered for 3 seconds and has a cooldown of 24 seconds or 19 seconds with a gold helmet. The AoE or area of effect for the snare is the radius you see when thrown, which is 8 meters. This means the first person that gets caught inside that radius will get tagged by the snare and tethered. If you don't know what a tether is, well, think of a circle. In the center of that circle is the arc snare. If you are tethered to that snare, you are only allowed to move within the radius of that said circle, which is 8 meters. So far, we've only had slows in the game. This is the first location locking ability we've seen, and I'm scared to think that they'd put knockups into the game, but that's a whole nother story. This is a single action ability, meaning as soon as you activate your ability action button, Q or LB or L1, it will throw the snare. This can be delayed by holding the ability action button until you're ready to launch, or you can deactivate it by switching weapons. How does this work? The arc snare travels in a straight, constant direction until it finds a target or hits a surface. There's no drop on it, so it can travel extremely far. However, it travels at 13 meters per second, which is pretty slow. The travel time for long distance means you won't be hitting anyone from across the map unless you got really good math skills or you get pretty lucky. Also, I should mention the radius of the snare, while it's in flight, is slightly smaller than when it's connected to a surface. Once touching a surface, it extends the top and bottom of its radius to more of a sphere instead of a tiny cylinder. Also, while on a surface, the snare can still target and tether anyone who walks into the AoE. The snare will stay active on that surface for 5.5 seconds before disappearing. Now, how do we use the snare? Well, because it's a slow traveling device, I recommend you use it at a close range, more so if the enemy is trying to escape you. Having the ability to lock someone into a position makes running away a lot harder. This is also good to use on enemies behind cover. 1, for seeing if the enemy is still there, and 2, keeping them there. Another good way to use this is to zone corners and corridors. Putting your snare down a corridor or towards the corner of an area will effectively block the enemy from moving to you through that location. The enemy won't be able to move through that area without getting tagged by the snare, so it keeps them in place. And if they do step inside the snare to come after you, well, they get tethered. This gives you time to shield or escape, or you can chunk a grenade in there for extra damage. This also applies to the sides of cover. Placing the snare on one side will force them to push off of that cover or push to the opposite side of the cover. And if it locks to someone, you know that you can either push or pull off while they're tethered. You can also try lobbing an explosive to the non-snared side. It might make them run into your snare, but that's a little more of a gamble on that one. Then you can use this to tether people out of jump towers, the new launch cannons, and even Valkyrie's ult. I'm unsure if you can tether someone out of a trident, but I presume you can. I wasn't able to test this. Another useful tip is if you're being chased and you use your breach, you can snare the area you come out of your ult, tethering and holding the person following. You can even put the snare on Crypto's drone, and Crypto can fly that into an enemy and it'll attach to them. You can also attach it to tridents, although snaring an enemy from those doesn't lock them into a position. It actually pulls the trident to that player, so it's not very useful. So in my unprofessional opinion, I'd say the best time to use this ability is when enemies are fleeing, so you can keep them from escaping. Also, if you're running away, if it's a narrow area, then placing your arc snare directly in front of you will stop the enemy from chasing you for a short time. Similar to the corridor and corners effect. I don't recommend using this in the beginning of fights, strictly because it doesn't secure any significant damage towards the engagement, and then you're just wasting animation time to throw it when you could be fighting. That being said, if you have the advantage and if you manage to catch an enemy out in the open to start the fight, your team can easily 3v1 that snared enemy for a fast knock. But that's something that needs to be coordinated, so it's up on you. Also, have someone or yourself follow up that snare with a grenade. If they're at the perfect range, you can throw your snare and then throw your grenade, and it should detonate right after the enemy gets snared or at the end of the snare duration. That goes for enemies hiding behind cover as well. Finally, Ashe's ultimate is her phase breach. This is a one-way fast-acting portal that your whole team can use. The breach travels 63 meters, only takes up to 2.5 seconds to travel the full length of the portal, and it is very silent. This has a cooldown of 160 seconds. The portal stays open for 13 seconds and can be traveled through multiple times by your team or enemy teams. This is a double action ult, meaning once you hit your ult action button, Z or LB, RB or L1, L2, it will pull up her sword, indicating the breach is ready to be opened. Then you'll need to hit the fire button to open the breach and travel through, or you can swap weapons to cancel. The ult cannot be avoided when you initially use it, meaning you can't make the portal and wait to enter like Wraith. If you're opening the breach, you better be ready to go through. Like I said a moment ago, the ult does have a 63 meter cap for its X-axis or its horizontal axis. However, it has a much higher cap for its Y or vertical axis. We can't accurately measure the distance in the meters in game, as the pings only work off of horizontal distance, but when shot upwards, you can reach crazy heights. This is the furthest or highest I was able to reach using her ult. Now I'll give you one guess as to what this ultimate is best used for. That's right, it's teleporting to POIs for good loot before your team gets there. No, I'm kidding, of course. The best use of this ultimate is engaging fights. Since this is a one-way portal, no one can enter from the exit, as my girlfriend says, and since it's super quiet, it works great for ambushing or flanking teams. This breach can also be utilized to travel quickly or escape situations. Now, I don't recommend using it to travel for travel's sake, but more so if you need to get a distance away from the enemies or the storm. Don't go using it to get loot like I joked about before. That's an awful waste of the ult when you may need it. For travel, use it more so to get out of a bad situation. You can even use it to gain high ground in a flash with its vast vertical range, like mentioned before. Also, with a breach being very narrow, you can use it to travel through windows and doors quite easily. It also negates energy shields, meaning that you can travel from inside a Gibraltar dome to outside, or outside the dome to inside, or into another dome. Domeception. The breach can be used in many ways, but here are a few that aren't super obvious. It can take you out of Ash's snare if you're caught in it. It can be used after launching from the launch cannon, which makes it almost impossible for the enemy team to follow you through it. It changes your direction on a dime and gets you out of the way faster. You can use it anywhere in midair if you're falling. You can even use it to kidnap people like Wraith's ult, but it's much harder since the one-way portal. Also, as a side note, you can step backwards after coming out of your breach so that the enemy coming through chasing you will be facing the opposite direction, so now you have a small advantage on them. Now again, in my unprofessional opinion, hands down the best use of this ult would be to combine it with Revenant's ult. Yes, this is just as bad as Reptane, but the new and improved Rash meta is so much more abusable and so much more annoying. Before I go into team comps, I want to clarify why this is so good to use and how to use it. It may be obvious to a few of you guys, but let me explain. The biggest thing here is going to be Rev's Totem and the breach used one after the other, very quickly. When you use this strategy, you should be placing Revenant's Totem down in a covered location that can't be destroyed, but also very close to the Ash portal that's going to be placed. Obviously, you need to enter the Rev ult before you use her breach, but make sure that your breach is set up close to the totem. That way, once you use your portal to engage, if and when you get sent back to the totem, you can immediately step to the side and use the portal again. This is much faster than the Reptane strategy, except at a shorter distance, but the one thing to look out for is the short duration on Ash's ult. Her breach will only be there for a short time, 13 seconds, much shorter than Revenant's ult, so if you use it to engage, make sure you're going full force. Don't linger. The longer you wait to fight in Rev's ult, the faster you lose the chance to jump back through the portal for extra damage. The whole idea of this is to use the breach back to back with the additional life of Rev's Totem and inflict as much damage as possible before the portal disappears. So the key points of her ultimate here is it's fast, silent, and it has a one-way action to it, which makes it great for engaging fights without the general presence being noticed. And number two, its range lets you travel far distances horizontally and vertically, allowing an easy entrance or escape and gaining higher ground or a better position. Now with that said, here are my selection of team comps based on how you're wanting to play. Two of the deadliest combos for aggression and engagement is going to be Ashe, Revenant, and Valkyrie, or Ashe, Revenant, and Crypto. These first three here allow you to traverse the map and engage very quickly. Between Ashe locating the death boxes and Valk being able to mark enemies from her ult, this sets up an easy way of finding enemies. Then using Rev's Totem and Ashe's Breach to engage gives you that deadly combo. The second three are team destroyers. You don't have as much versatility with moving around the map, but when you get into combat, you can set up the totem, portal in as normal, except right before throwing your portal, have Crypto fly in and ult the team. This gives you an easy damage to start the fight, and you can clean up for the rest. You can always swap out Valkyrie for Octane or Pathfinder, but her ult offers a better way to track and travel than the other two, so. Another aggressive team comp for hunting and locating is going to be Ashe, Valkyrie, and Bloodhound, or Ashe, Seer, and Bloodhound. Tracking death boxes is great, but once you get to the area of those teams, those pings from your tracker only last so long. Bloodhound being the main key factor for this team is that his footprint tracking and scanning ability help you find your enemies much faster after Ashe has found their general location. Then use Valk to find them from the sky, or use Seer to track their heartbeats and use his ult to track their movement. Could be said that you can swap Bloodhound for Seer as well, but it's really up to you and your team. A combination for more of a strategic play would be Ashe and Wraith. I know what you're thinking, well, why Wraith? Well, between her and Ashe both using their ults, it lets you traverse crazy distances and height, allowing you to get a really good advantage on a team just by changing your positions without being out of cover. Since both go into the void, and Wraith can use her tactical ability to enter the void while using her ult. It's really good. This comp is meant for placement strategy, so you can substitute your third legend for someone with either movement or recon. You could also do someone who's good with stationary fighting like Rampart or Caustic. I'd say Gibraltar's a good pick just because it's Gibraltar, but you can really use any legends that you want for this one. So now that we've discussed how to use her abilities, let's talk about Ashe a little bit. Her whole kit is based around hunting teams. So if you don't have an aggressive mindset when it comes to playing, then I don't think she's the legend for you. You should be using her to track and engage teams as much as possible. That's literally what her kit is built around. If you don't play with that type of aggression, then you're losing out on playing her properly, or even worse, you're taking her from someone who does play aggressively. Now, I'm not telling you who you should and shouldn't play. I'm simply saying that if you're not an aggressive player and you would rather get into a good position in the ring or gatekeep or something, then she's not the best pick for you. But if you like to rush teams any chance you get, then she's your gal. As far as viability goes, she is incredible. You could run her on almost any team comp and have an advantage just because of her passive. As far as playability goes, well, I wouldn't suggest her for new players. Her kit isn't too hard to use, but it does take some knowledge on how firefights work in the game so you know where to go and when to use your ult. Also, you need to have that mindset of constantly checking your map for death boxes so you can use that passive to your advantage. I don't see any new players getting a hang on her very easily if they don't understand how firefights work, but veteran players will know what to do with her. Definitely a top tier legend, for sure. To end the video, let's go over the key points of Ashe real fast. Number 1, her ability to see death boxes and mark enemies gives you a huge advantage to know where to go and see who's nearby so you can get ready or get going. Number 2, the versatility of her ultimate. Using it to engage, escape, or quickly cover terrain and gain height allows you to make huge engagement plays or disengage a bad situation. And lastly, number 3, the aggression that she brings to the table with a full team comp. Combined with the right legends, her abilities are a force to be reckoned with. And with this video on how to Ashe, you now have a better chance at winning the fight. But hey, I'm no pro and these are just my thoughts and observations by playing her. So with that said, this is the end of the video. Comment your thoughts down below on what you think of Ashe. Let me know if you think I missed anything, and let me know what legend you'd like to see me cover in the future. Be sure to check out my how-to shorts videos for just quick short guides on how to do things. And of course, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell notification icon for when the next how-to video comes out. I will see you guys all in the next video. Be jolly.